Live from Luke's Jedi Temple, it's the Movie Change Up Podcast Disney Plus Weekly Review, where each week Tristan and I break down This Week in Disney Plus. I've said it a million times, self-explanatory title, which was why it's such a great title. If you haven't seen our show before, basically we look at what's released on Disney Plus this week, give it a review, say whether you should watch it or whether you can kind of just skip it, and that's what we're about here. We try to make your lives easier. Tristan, for the past few weeks, kind of the same thing over and over. Been a super light week. There's been like one big drop, but no like medium-sized drops, just a few small drops. What was your thought on Disney Plus this week?
Yeah, you mentioned me tell you if you should watch it or skip it, and I always try and come in positive. But Joe, I'm gonna say honestly, for once, I feel like this is a week where you probably could have skipped Disney Plus, and you didn't miss much, because the big thing is a very talking point. It's going to be something that inspires a lot of takes and a lot of discussion that's been talked about a lot in the last couple of days on the internet. But if you're not a big Star Wars fan, I don't think there's much to offer you here this week on Disney Plus. And hopefully we can fill in the gaps and give you some insight into what we watched and maybe some stuff you liked about it. But yeah, a week for Disney Plus here.
Yeah, I agree. So our main topic that we're going to talk about, kick off the show with, is episode 6 of the Book of Boba Fett, titled From the Desert Comes a Stranger. Basically, plot of the episode, we kick off where we left off last time. Mandalorian is off to find his old pal Grogu, his basically adopted child, and he's trying to, reconnect with him, and he runs into, first off, he runs into R2-D2, who's off with Luke. And then he kind of runs into, spoiler alert, runs into Luke and Ahsoka. And they're with Grogu and training Grogu. And it's kind of cool to see Luke and Ahsoka together, up until this episode. It's long been, standing. Have they ever run into each other? Have they ever met? And we finally have that question answered. And a lot of it, this episode had to do with attachment, and Grogu's attachment to Din Djarin and kind of the effect on that, and at the end of the episode, or at least what we see with Grogu in that storyline, is Grogu's presented an option. He can either go back to and choose the Mandalorian life and take his Mandalorian armor, or he can take Yoda's old lightsaber and become a Jedi. And then, back on Tatooine, Cobb Vanth is out, trying to take out the Pikes, trying to deal with the Pikes, and the Pikes send somebody in, and that's everyone's favorite bounty hunter, Cad Bane, is sent to face off against Cobb Vanth and kind of remove him from the situation, and it ends in a shootout that doesn't end well for Cobb Vanth. My guess, I'm like 99.9% sure Cobb Vanth will survive, but it ended with a shot to the stomach and him kind of doubled over, and that was pretty much the end of the episode. Tristan, you said you have some hot takes, some things you want to get off your chest. I can't wait to hear them.
Look, I'll start with the positives. Cobb Vanth, I think, is an awesome character, and I love when they bring in these really small characters that have had really minor roles in the Star Wars world and kind of give them this chance to shine in kind of a bigger platform. And Timothy Olyphant adds so much to that character in his small performance, and he has this kind of cool, hot cowboy vibe to him that I think is different from a lot of the characters in Star Wars. So I love Cobb Vanth. Hope he's not gone for good. Yeah, they made a whole point of like pulling out like a medical pack thing and having it go on his chest, and you never see that in Star Wars. Unless someone's going to come back to life, they would have just been dead and fried on the ground. They would have showed him like they're dead. But I think the fact that they had like a medical person there to pull out some medical stuff to help him out shows he's probably going to come back. Yep. But yeah, I like that scene. I thought that was a great introduction to Cad Bane. Even if you don't know who he is, you know that he's this terrifying, threatening bounty hunter that's now on the case, and I think you get the threat of that character in this first scene, and I think you feel it from Cobb Vanth's perspective as well. Like, you can tell that he knows he's not going to win this duel. Like, from the second he sees Cad Bane walking up, he's like, guys, go inside, get some shelter. And you can see in his eyes in the performance that he knows this is the end for him. He knows he's not going to outdraw this guy. I don't know if he knows who Cad Bane is or if he just knows he's some outlaw, but I saw his performance that he thought he was a goner, and I really liked that in the performance, and I like that Cobb Vanth was back. I also like Mando's ship. I don't know how much because we saw it last episode, but seeing it like in its full action, its paint job and everything like that, it looked really cool, and I like that it matches like the chrome of his armor. That was also very cool. And those are pretty much the ends of my positives for the episode here.
Hmm.
Those are the cool parts. Uh, I my name on the if you're watching video, I made my name on here Boba Fett because this is clearly the book of Boba Fett. I want to remind you of a time, Joe, when we were excited on the show because we were talking about Robert Rodriguez and he was going to do this standalone Boba Fett show and it was going to be so dark and cool. It was going to be Boba Fett in the crime world. It was going to be Boba Fett kind of not going to like R-rated territory, but at least pushing the PG-13 a little tiny bit, and being a little bit darker than we're used to seeing him. And he's not even in the show. Like, where did he go? It's clearly just a Mandalorian show, and I defended it last week because it kind of felt like it thematically tied into the show itself, and this feels like it doesn't tie in at all. This just feels like another episode of Mandalorian that they wanted to get done, and they couldn't really find a place to do it. And I don't like the fact that the show's pivoted all of a sudden from being a Boba Fett show to being Star Wars, the TV show, with everybody they could possibly find thrown in. And especially when it doesn't make sense with the rest of the show. Like the fact that we had like 3 or 4 episodes of normal Boba Fett show, and then out of nowhere it's Mandalorian again. I just feel like it's strange. It doesn't really make sense, and it feels like a big letdown. Like, sure, it's fun to see these characters again, but I wanted a Boba Fett show, and this is not a Boba Fett show at all. He's not even involved in the plot. Like, I feel like this was a big miss, and the cliffhanger ending of like, oh, who's Grogu? What's Grogu gonna pick? I'm like, I don't care. Put that in Mandalorian. Like that. I'm not here to see Grogu make a life choice. I'm here to see Boba Fett do some crime world, underworld shenanigans, do some killing, do some violence, anything, and or any kind of plot. Yeah, I just felt like it. I'm not looking forward to the rest of the show, Joe. To be honest with you, and I'm glad it's almost over.
Yeah, there's one episode left. I'm almost curious if like Favreau and Filoni, if they could go back in time, if they would have called the Mandalorian something else, like if they had just called it like Tales from Star Wars or something, or like Tales from the Star Wars Underworld or something, and because I think part of it is they would have just made this like season 3 of that show, but I think with the Mandalorian called the Mandalorian, it kind of, and Boba Fett kind of basically being like I'm not a Mandalorian, kind of made them not be able to call this Mandalorian season 3, when I think that was somewhat their intention. They said, during production, I think Favreau said in an interview, or someone said in an interview, that this is basically Mandalorian season 2.5, which definitely makes sense. I'm like kind of where you're at, but I think part of it is I'm enjoying the episode so much I really don't care what the show is called. And I think I'm curious how much it's ultimately going to tie together in the finale, because Boba's all about I'm building this team. So I'm curious if there's going to be a situation where like Mandalorian or Din Djarin goes, and you have Cobb Vanth there, Fennec Shand, those mod kids are all on this team together, and some of this stuff is still relevant, and some of the stuff we're seeing is important, like Din using the Darksaber and learning to use the Darksaber, and maybe there is a point where they're all in trouble and somehow Grogu senses it, and so Luke and Grogu and Ahsoka all show up, and it's like, okay, we kind of needed to see what we saw for all of this to pay off. But I want to pitch you an idea, because I pitched you an idea last time of the show should all be in chronological order, which I still stand by. But how would you feel if basically every episode, because Boba Fett was not the lead. He was a background character. He was like the secondary or third character, but in each episode was from a different character's perspective. So the first episode would be from like the warrior of the Tuscans' perspective, and then sticking in chronological order, the second episode would be from Fennec Shand's perspective, and then the third episode could maybe be from Garza Fwip's perspective or something, and then fourth episode Mandalorian's perspective, but just Boba Fett's with him. Fifth episode could be from Luke's perspective, but Mandalorian shows up with Boba Fett, along the way, and then maybe like the seventh episode or something, or the final episode is finally from Boba Fett's perspective.
Yeah, I think that's a much better idea, and I could see it playing out in my head. You could have the kind of voiceover of the character. Maybe you could have something where it's like each one's kind of the story of like what their version of Boba Fett is like, and you could kind of have this idea that he's like this undefined character, similar to how he is among Star Wars fans, where he's kind of like what you make of him. And I like that idea. Yeah. And for me, it's not so much about the fact that it's called Boba Fett, so I want Boba Fett. It's about the fact that like we had 4 episodes where Boba Fett was the main character, and now all of a sudden it's this totally completely different
Yeah.
show that doesn't feel like it fits not at all with the show that I was already watching.
Yeah.
And that would have made it work a bit better, especially because to me, like having a one-off episode that's totally disconnected from your main character is kind of cool, and it's like, oh look, we got this random like
Yeah.
shot that's totally different, but when they do two in a row like this, it makes me feel almost like it's a pivot or something, like they were in the middle of production for Boba Fett, and they were like, oh, this is not going that well. Let's kind of like pivot this to be a large Star Wars show,
Yeah.
and
Or
it
if
feels a
they
little bit more desperate than it did last week.
or if they had spread them out or something, and then you had Mandalorian saying, "Oh, I need to go see Grogu," and like, or Fennec recruiting Din Djarin and him going off and having basically the episode 5 would have been like episode 3, and then this episode would have been like still episode 6 or something. So you had like two Mandalorian episode or two Boba Fett episodes, a random kind of Mandalorian episode, but it still ties in. Two more Boba Fett episodes, another kind of random Mandalorian episode, and then seventh final episode is a Boba Fett episode.
How excited were you for Ahsoka, Joe? I know you were a big happy when Ahsoka showed up, I'm sure.
Super excited. Love the character. Great character. A lot of people say, "Oh, it feels too different," but I think a lot of the difference just comes from the fact of like the last time we saw. I mean, most of the time we saw her, she was 14 to 17 years old. Then we saw her a little bit. Trying to do the math here, 17, roughly 30. And now she's like in her early 40s. So I just feel like the difference to me is just a more mature version of the same character. I don't really feel like, oh, this is a completely different character. It's just the same character, but now she's 40 instead of a teenager or in her early 30s.
Yeah, I thought it's a decent take on the character. We have gotten so little. I mean, we've only seen her in like 2 episodes so far, really. So we haven't really gotten a chance to have her shine. She's really just kind of showed up and been like, "Oh, look, it's Ahsoka," and it's fun in the moment. But I'm sure she has a whole show coming out, so I'm sure that'll be like
Yeah.
more focused on her character.
And I'm
But
and I'm sure that one of the episodes will 100% see the first meeting of Ahsoka and Luke. I don't think they're just going to skip over that and not show it.
yeah, I definitely think so. And that's something that is cool about this type of a show, and where you can see these things that you never in a million years would have thought that you'd see. Like we're actually seeing Luke Skywalker straight out of the images of Return of the Jedi, like a spitting image of young Luke with Ahsoka on the planet that future Kylo Ren's going to be trained on, and they're training a baby Yoda.
Yeah.
Like what a collage of crazy things that happen, and like that's the stuff that you never imagine happening, and the fact that normally that kind of weird, bizarre stuff is reserved for like a 20-minute kid cartoon on Cartoon Network, and it's like something that isn't necessarily being taken seriously. And not to say this is being taken seriously, but it's at least being talked about and like watched. And it's very cool that we get to see these kind of things happen on a live action scale and on this big budget, huge scale that makes it feel, whether you like it or not, more real and more important than the animated stuff does.
Yeah. Also, there's one thing I was slightly disappointed by, and it's other than like maybe the format of the show issues, and that's in Grogu's Order 66 flashback. You could tell he was in the Jedi Temple. I was really hoping to see a shot of Anakin mowing through Jedi. The longer we hung on that shot, I was just waiting for Anakin to show up, but he never did.
See, that would have been cool. It would have been an unexpected character appearance. They like to do that in this show, and it would have been more interesting, I think, than what we got.
Yeah.
I don't want to rail on this show too much, but this episode for me kind of like stuck a lot of the things that I don't like about these shows, where it's very much focused on the old characters coming back and this preconceived love you have. Like Luke Skywalker in this is not even a character. He's not even an actor. He's just like a computer generated version of the character, saying lines that aren't even real, like from a computer generated lines. And I also felt like it was a little bit I wasn't so upset about Ahsoka's character being different, but I honestly felt like they missed Luke's arc a little bit here, where he has this whole thing with Grogu about like, oh, Jedi can't have attachments, and you have to let go of your attachments to the people you care about to be a Jedi. And I'm like, isn't that the opposite of the lesson he learned in the movies? Like, didn't he learn like, oh, it's my friends that are my power, essentially, where he was like, oh, I was told by Obi-Wan and Yoda to not go help my friends, but I went and helped them anyway because I'm the hero, and that's what the heroes do. And ultimately, like, the people he cares about are the ones that save him, and the people he cares about are the ones that inspire him. So I felt like that was his arc in the original trilogy, was to realize that he doesn't have to be alone. He doesn't have to have no attachments like the old guard tells him to. That he can have the people he cares about, and that's what ultimately gives him his power and his will to fight. So I don't think it makes any sense at all for Luke to be like, "Oh, you got to give up your attachments, Grogu. You can't have anyone that you care about." That feels like not Luke at all.
But there are, I mean, that could 100% be true and they could miss the mark, but I've seen a lot of theories online because a lot of people are like, oh, he definitely ends up with both. He definitely ends up with the Mandalorian armor and the lightsaber. So there's a lot of speculation that Luke actually is like wanting him to pick the Mandalorian armor, and he's like, all right, like you made the right decision. Are, you actually understand like what it truly should mean to be a Jedi and blah, blah, blah. And like, you've earned both. And if they go that route, I'll 100% be up because they've done that stuff all the time. Of like, you know, at the end of season 2 with the dark saber, and it's like, oh, you have to win it in battle, and everyone's like, well, that conflicts with what we saw in Rebels. And then you watch the previous episode of this show, and then they kind of explain to you, it's like, no, you just haven't heard the full story yet. Like I fully would not be surprised if they do something like that where he picks the arm, he ends up picking the armor. He's like, okay, you do understand attachments and you do have people you care about, and that's important, so you can be a Jedi.
I think if that's the route they go, that's a bit better. But I did feel like this was kind of a weird version of Luke that didn't necessarily feel like he experienced the things that I know he experienced. And I don't want to be one of those people who's like, oh, not my Luke type of person. But like, it's not necessarily my Luke as much as it feels like it's not the Luke that we know of in these movies. Like, I don't see this Luke going and becoming the Last Jedi Luke. I don't see this Luke being the one that just blew up the Death Star again,
Yeah. I get that, but
I also want to commend them though because the CGI has come a long way just in the last couple of years. Like that looks outside of when he talked. I think when he talked, it still looks a little bit strange. But I think when he's standing still or just kind of expressing his face, I think it looks really, really good. Like you can tell if you know that it's not a character. But I think if you just watch that, you'd be like, wow, how did they get Luke in there like that? I think there's moments where it's uncanny, and I also think there's moments where it looks really, really good.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like people complain about the technology, but I'm for it because I mean that's kind of what Star Wars is about pushing technology, whether it's like digital recreation of faces or the volume or whatever you pick, and like that's kind of the last special effects thing we haven't mastered. Like we can make anything else look real. Like look at the Lion King. I mean, the Jon Favreau Lion King wasn't great, but all of the animals looked real throughout it. So it's like we can make animals look real. We can make any kind of landscape look real. Humans are kind of the last thing as far as groundbreaking special effects. So I'm for it. They've already vastly improved in just a little over the last year. So I'm curious to see like Ahsoka season 4. Like what crazy ass shit are we seeing?
Yeah, I'm really curious to see how they bring this technology forward. I don't love it as a concept. I wish we were focusing our technology developments elsewhere, maybe, or like you say, we can do everything about with CGI. And it's like I've seen some terrible, terrible CGI creatures. Like I wish we used this technology to make really good aliens for Star Wars or something instead of just like, oh, we got to get Mark Hamill out of this 1982 or whatever it was. It's got to look exactly like Mark Hamill, and I can see the dangerous road this goes down of leading us to no new characters and just a bunch of repeating of the old characters, and you can see the moral gray area where it's like, oh, what if an actor like doesn't want you to use their likeness, and can you or should you? And like if we get a Han Solo de-aged and we hear afterwards that Harrison Ford didn't want it to happen, like how do we feel about that? And how do we also feel about de-aging actors when you could easily have recast them? It's one thing to have it be Luke for one scene. It's different when you're having him have multiple scenes and conversations and major points of character development for main characters like Grogu. I wonder how this would have looked if you recast him with someone else, and especially with something like Harrison Ford with Han Solo, where you already have another actor who's played him. It would feel weird for me to de-age Harrison Ford when we already have Alden Ehrenreich, but at the same time, they're already doing that with Luke. And I don't know. For me, I'd much rather they recast these characters and gave us new actors to play them. And if they're going to do this de-aging stuff, have it be short bursts. Have it be like one scene or a couple of scenes. And the fact that Luke was so prominently in this episode makes me nervous that we're going to be getting a lot of this and a lot more of this. And I think it could become really distracting. And CGI that ages very poorly too, because it looks good now, but if you watch this in 2 years, is it going to look terrible? I don't know.
Yeah, I get that. Anything else you got to say? Any predictions for next week?
Next week, I hope we get back to Boba Fett because it's the
Yeah.
final episode.
Yeah.
we, we have a lot to get done with. I mean, he's built up his team now, so I would imagine it's going to just be like a battle episode essentially. Like you got your guys together, you got your set your mission, and then kind of just execute the mission.
Yeah.
And I wonder how much of this is going to be conclusive. Are we going to get like a wrap up to Boba Fett story? I personally, before this last two episodes, I was wondering if Boba Fett would die. I'm not quite sure now because we've suddenly have no time with him.
Yeah.
But I wonder how conclusive this finale will be compared to a bunch of pilots for other shows, which is what I'm most nervous about. That it's just going to be like a soft conclusion to the arc we have now, and then a bunch and 25 minutes of setup for other shows.
Yeah. Yeah. It'll be curious to see how it goes, but who knows?
I'm looking forward to it, though. I mean, I said I'm not excited for this show, but we've got one episode left. They're fun conversations, and
Yep.
I enjoy them through osmosis of you. I guess you spread your positivity to me. You know, you come on here, you start talking about how much you liked it, and I'll be like, you know what, maybe it wasn't that bad. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just more curious to see how it all pans out. I think the ending will really kind of determine how I feel about the show overall.
Yeah, I think they have a good shot here to bring the ending back around and kind of make it all work, or to kind of flop it and have us be like, see this as like a really messy kind of collage of two or three different shows and no clear ideas.
Yeah, if like the ending comes and it's like, okay, in the final battle against the Pikes, we have like a tribe of Tuscans come in. We have like all of the characters we've met. We've had Din Djarin shows up and then he's in trouble, and so Luke and Grogu and Ahsoka all show up. It's like, okay, it's gonna make all of these episodes that we didn't really feel all that relevant now more relevant. However, if Din Djarin shows up and he really doesn't do a whole lot, and like Grogu and Ahsoka and Luke are nowhere to be found, then it's gonna make these episodes feel even more irrelevant.
Yeah, I had no idea what to expect, and I don't want these to feel like wasted time. So I definitely hope that I mean, at least Grogu and the Mandalorian are going to play, and you'd also think that Cad Banth is going to show up again, and Cad Bane obviously is going to show up again. So characters here are going to be back, and I just wonder, like, is Cad Bane back to die in one episode, or is he going to come back and be a character again? Is Cad Banth coming back to be one episode, or is he going to be a character again? So it'll be nice to get a picture. And it'll also give us a picture, too, of how contained these shows are actually going to be.
Yeah.
Because this is our first time we've gotten a Star Wars show that's not The Mandalorian, at least of the live action shows.
Yeah, well, it's why it makes me more excited for Obi-Wan, because I'm curious of like, okay, what's just something that exists because it's a Star Wars show, or what's something that exists because it's a, Favreau Filoni show. Like, even something like I brought it up before, even something like ending the credits with a concept art. Like, is that something that's going to be in all the Star Wars shows, or is that just a Favreau Filoni thing?
Yeah, I'm really curious to see how we get a better picture of these going forward. I really, really hope that this show is on an idea of what we're getting from all of these shows, because if that's what it is, it's going to be a hard time watching these.
Yeah.
I will be honest with you.
Yeah.
This is the quality you expect from all of these shows. I don't know if I can make it.
Yeah. All right, you ready for the next topic?
I'm ready for the next topic, just something that might be more up your alley than mine.
All right, yeah, I kind of figured, I wasn't sure. So our next topic, they dropped some ESPN 30 for 30s. If you don't know what they are, the concept originally started in like the 90s or early 2000s, where 30 filmmakers had basically 30 minutes not 30 minutes to make it, but the final product had to be a 30-minute long documentary related to sports about basically anything of their choosing. And then they just kind of kept the brand name, so essentially any sports documentary that ESPN releases is still released under the 30 for 30 banner. And the first one is titled The Book of Manning, which I technically don't even think is a 30 for 30. I think it was a SEC story, which who gives a shit, whatever. Basically, it covered the Manning family, starting with Archie Manning, who was a quarterback for Ole Miss and then eventually went to play for the New Orleans Saints and had a not-so-great NFL career, played like 11 seasons and never had a winning season during his NFL time in the NFL. Then you had Cooper Manning, who was a wide receiver at Ole Miss, but because of some medical problems, never advanced to the NFL and never really played in college. Then you had the middle son, Peyton Manning, who decided not to go to Ole Miss and instead went to Tennessee and almost won the Heisman, but then lost to Charles Woodson. He eventually went to play for the Indianapolis Colts, won a Super Bowl, and then he went to the Denver Broncos and won a Super Bowl with them. And then finally, the last brother, Eli Manning, who played for Ole Miss as well as his brother and his dad. And, he had a pretty good career there, went on to play for the New York Giants where he won 2 Super Bowls. So it's kind of, I was going into this documentary, I kind of expected it to cover the entire career of the Mannings, but it really just focused on their college career, which I should have expected when it was branded as a SEC story. But I think it was kind of interesting. You see a lot of parents in sports who push these kids and try to force their kids to be these pro athletes or be Division 1. And Archie Manning, who on the outside looking in, you might have thought he was one of those dads, but he was just yeah, I'm not their coach. I'll let their coaches coach, and I'll just be their dad. So I thought it was kind of interesting just watching that. But Tristan, as someone who's not that big of a sports fan, what was kind of your opinion on this first one?
Yeah, I thought it was a big, surprising choice to call it Book of Manning and not even have Manning in the episode. I was like, wow, no Mannings.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll be honest with you, Joe. Before I watched this, I knew who Peyton Manning was, and I knew he had a brother who also was famous. And I could probably not have told you with a gun to my head what team Peyton Manning played for. So I was that ignorant of the thing going into it. And I did learn from this. I didn't really realize the legacy of the family and how much that went back generationally to the sport of football, and how many members of that family were so pivotal in sports, not just in the current generation, but from college to, you mentioned New Orleans Saints and a lot of other teams that they impacted. So I learned a lot from that, and I kind of liked the fact that it wasn't a whole big long profile of their entire careers. It was more about how they kind of grew up into being the people that they are now, and kind of it was obviously kind of a puff piece. It wasn't trying to get into the deep roots of the childhood trauma or anything like that, but it was interesting enough that I definitely am glad that I watched it. And it's not something I ever would have watched if you didn't tell me that it was on here to watch for the show. So it was something I had a decent time with. It didn't necessarily change my life. I'm not going to be fighting for it to win some awards for best documentary or something. Of course, it came out in 2013, but yeah, I learned about the Manning family, and I don't know, because I know you know a lot more about these people than I did. So I don't know how much of this was new information, how much of it was just the Wikipedia page condensed into a hour-long video. So I'm curious what your thoughts were as someone who knew the Mannings way more than I did.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a whole lot new. Basically, all the stuff with Archie Manning was kind of the stuff that I didn't really know, but I knew about Peyton deciding to go to Tennessee, and that was kind of a big quote-unquote controversy at the time, and Eli going to Ole Miss was kind of, and I knew a lot of stuff about Cooper, and Cooper's been in the news recently because the Book of Manning isn't fully finished being written yet, because his son Arch Manning is basically the #1 high school football player in the country right now. So
oh wow, that's crazy.
Big discussion on where he's going to go to college. A lot of people think maybe Ole Miss. The Ole Miss's head football coach follows one person on Instagram, and that's Arch Manning. So
so how do you feel? This makes me wonder about sports in general, athletic ability, and how much do you think that ties into genetics, and the fact that all these people are just genetically gifted to being big and having the build for football? Or how much of it do you think is the nurture of being raised from the day one by Archie Manning, who's this known star of football, who's gonna from day one push you to be doing the best thing you could possibly be doing? And I really wondered about that, and that's a question people ask about. Oh, is it people playing favorites in the family? Is that why all these families have legacy people? You think of something like the Kennedys, where it's all of these people get into politics because there's these interconnected people who know each other and kind of get their son in something else. And yeah, I thought it was a really cool profile of his family that made me think of those questions, even though that wasn't really something they were asking. I was questioning okay, is it just natural gift? Is it the fact that they're Mannings that gets them extra attention and extra eyes? What is it that makes them different than other families?
I think it's 50-50. I think, I mean, to a certain extent, you have to have a certain body type to be, a certain position, if you're 6'4", 200 pounds, you're basically off to a solid start of being an NFL quarterback. But then also the mentality of like, okay, you're playing quarterback and you're in seventh grade, and your dad is, an NFL caliber quarterback. He didn't have the greatest career, but he's still better than 99% of dads at being a quarterback. So anytime you have a question, you can go to him and be like, hey, I did this, but should I have done this, or what should I do in this situation, or what should I do in that situation? And same thing with Arch Manning. He has basically two uncles in the NFL Hall of Fame as quarterbacks, and a grandfather who was a 11-year NFL veteran. So he has basically three of the best football minds a text message away of, looking at film with him, doing all these things where he's probably in the seventh. When he was in sixth grade, he understood football and play calling and all of these things at a level that high school seniors didn't even understand, like high school senior quarterbacks. So by the time he's a high school senior quarterback, his mind is probably at like an NFL level. So
Yeah, I'm sure it helps to be able to, when you're practicing for your high school game, text Peyton Manning and be like, "Hey, can I get some advice right,
yeah, yeah,
right now?"
yeah, yeah, and like too, they like the family, like pretty much it's avoided like personal controversy. Like there's nothing. There's with Peyton, there's only been like really one off the field incident I can remember, and that was when he was like a freshman at Tennessee or a sophomore at Tennessee, where I don't even know if it's been fully confirmed, but I think he like took his pants off and like shoved his butt into like some female journalist's face, and it's like
Jeez.
not the best, but it's also like, okay, he was 19 years old at the time, and if like that's the worst thing he's ever done, I'm not going to judge a 40-year-old man by like one dumb thing he did when he was 19, if that's, the worst thing he's ever done.
Yeah, especially like you think of the types of people, like
Yeah,
the stereotypes you can go to for like football players in the athletics. You imagine like
mm-hmm.
these troublemakers, these buff guys who are getting in
Yeah,
fights or harassing women or
yeah,
you know any any kind of the horror stories you hear. So yeah, it sounds like decent guys all
yeah,
around, and good profile of the family. Nice puff piece,
yeah.
you know.
I mean, that's to a certain extent, that's what the 30 for 30s are, but there are some darker ones. The one I'd recommend, I can't fully remember, but it's somewhat connected to the movie Goodfellas, and some of the characters from Goodfellas, like the real life people, are in it, and it's basically about the Boston College point shaving scandal, where some of the Boston College athletes admitted to it and said others were involved, and others have not admitted to it. But basically, the mob paid them to intentionally lose games or not win them by as many points as they should have.
Well, that's an interesting story. Yeah, I look at 30 for 30 and I've seen a couple of them, but it's shocking how many there are.
Yeah. Another one we both watched is the Four Falls of Buffalo, which is one of the ones I knew really the least about of the three that I watched, and that is basically about the four seasons in which the Buffalo Bills lost the Super Bowl 4 years in a row, which I don't even understand how mentally you could do after the third time. I think part of it is like you're going into the fourth one, and like they were talking about it in the fourth one where you're like, oh, this is the one we're gonna win, like this is the one, like we came here three times, we have to win this one. But I think partially in the back of your mind it gets to the point where you don't even think you can win it. So but it was kind of an interesting story. Jim Kelly, who in the NFL was kind of in a different spot than it is now. The mid 80s, late 80s is where the NFL really took off and became the big brand that it was. But he was drafted by Buffalo, and he's like, I don't want to go live in Buffalo. And he also got drafted by the USFL to play in Houston. Like now, if an athlete was drafted by two different football leagues, the USFL and the NFL, like it's no question he's 100% going to the NFL no matter what city either one would drafted him. Like it's not even comparable. Like
Yeah, that much I know.
yeah.
I
What were your
I
thoughts on
thought
this?
I like this one actually. I knew nothing about this. Like I didn't know that they had done these four in a row losses. I didn't know the whole story at all. So I went into it very blind, and I got a decent amount out of it. I liked that this kind of highlighted the actual parts of the games, like some of the turning points of the games that were kind of like memorable moments for them, and kind of the idea of looking back on these pivotal parts of your life, how many years later, and thinking like, what would my life have been, and that was kind of a theme towards the beginning of like they're saying, yeah, of course I look at, I think, what would my franchise look like if we won? What would my career look like if I won? What would my profile as a influence look like if I won? And I think that's a relatable theme even outside of athletes. It's easy to look back and be like, oh, what would my life be like if I did this thing differently, or if this thing that I messed up, I didn't mess it up, you know? And I think that makes it a very relatable kind of documentary, you know. And I thought about my constant losses on movie Change Up, and I seem to constantly be losing, losing, and losing. You know, I gotta get myself a win. So uh, I saw myself in there a little bit, Joe. I won't lie.
You're the Buffalo Bills of movie change up, you know.
Yeah, I thought it was very good and kind of human in the fact that it got into these individual people's like emotional stakes in these games. And people talk about sports as like these Shakespearean level clashes of like high stakes, kind of everything on the table with these people. And I like that you can get the human side of this is like everyone in the world is watching this game, and yet there's like a dozen people are going to be the ones that change the whole fate of this whole franchise and of these major cities. And I thought it was really great and kind of gave me an insight into the kind of bigger stakes of football. It's something that I don't necessarily understand myself because I'm not a fan of football, but it's a nice reminder of like how big and this can feel to people who are into it, people who are involved in it. This is like the biggest possible thing, you know.
Yeah, yeah, especially like Buffalo's the like epitome of that because you know like a lot of people were talking in the documentary who are Buffalo fans and live in Buffalo and they're like you know these other cities that have football teams it's like okay the people of you know the fans of the you know well I guess now the Washington Commanders which is going to take a while to get used to but they have you know they have DC there they have all of these other things that DC is known for like the New York Jets the New York Giants like New York is known for so many things like Buffalo we're known for the Bills and that's it that's all we have here.
Yeah, I thought it really had that as a forefront too that that the Bills are like the thing that Buffalo has, and like you people see themselves in these players, and they see them as like these characters that represent things. And yeah, I like this one, and I liked. Yeah, I mentioned that it highlighted some of the stuff within the games too, which helped for me because I hadn't seen them, you know. So it's one thing where they start kind of talking about games as if I know what they're talking about, or like some of the Manning stuff. It felt like in a way they were talking about stuff as if I knew what they were talking about, and I didn't know what they were talking about. And this did a good job of when they're talking about something, making sure I knew what they were talking about. And when I look at 30 for 30s, I think, oh, how would this appeal to somebody who's not a sports fan? And this one actually did a really good job for me of making it work for me, even though I don't know the story at all. I'm not really invested emotionally.
Yeah, yeah, I was kind of similar because all I really knew about the Buffalo Bills, like as far as like the that they lost 4 Super Bowls in a row, and that's really all I knew about the story. And they kind of bring that up too about how like that became a pop culture like icon and how they kind of became a joke for a while. But one of the things I kind of like that they subtly touched on is a lot of you know former pro athletes, whether it's the NFL, the NBA, NHL, Major League Baseball, like a lot of the players when asked the one thing they miss the most is like the other players and the camaraderie and all of that. And one of the moments that reminds me of that is the kicker who, in their first lost, missed a last second kick and you know lost the game. And he was talking about how one of the most like important moments of you know his career, one of the most memorable moments of his career was after a loss. There was some big public event where the whole team was and the entire crowd was chanting for him to come out because they wanted to see him and it meant a lot to him and kind of reminded me of that how like some of the of like athletes some of the more memorable and important moments to them are moments that weren't even on the field or on the court.
Yeah, I think that's what people miss sometimes about whether it's football or it's any like culture like this. I think about movies and people who aren't into movies like me and they don't really understand like the event around the movie. It's not just watching the movie, it's like thinking about it, it's talking about it afterwards, it's
Yeah.
waiting outside the theater and it's the kind of culture around the whole thing. And yeah, I love that interview with I can't remember the guy's name now, but he's like kind of on the steps of this city hall and he's talking about this moment in his life when they were all cheering for him. And yeah, that to me is a highlight of the thing where it really is the human side of the story and the fact that this guy who made this very ill-fated mistake that may have turned the whole entire tide of this thing. And like, it could have been easy for fans to hate him and fans to like attack him or boo him or something like that. You hear all kinds of terrible stories about like very dedicated fan bases who destroy people who just happen to make mistakes or happen to make something they don't like and that kind of a thing. So it's a very positive story about positive fandom and positive uh, sportsmanship, so I liked it a lot.
Yeah, it reminds me of kind of currently how, for anyone that doesn't know, Matthew Stafford, who was the quarterback of the Detroit Lions for 12 seasons, never won a playoff game during his time there, and pretty much anyone that follows the Lions knows it wasn't his fault. He basically did anything he could to drag the team to relevancy, and he ultimately, this last offseason, requested a trade, and they traded him to the Rams, and now their Rams are headed to the Super Bowl, and more people in Detroit watched the Rams. I don't remember who the Rams 49ers NFC Championship game that would send the Rams to the Super Bowl than watch the last Detroit Lions Thanksgiving Day game. So basically, like, everyone in Detroit is like sitting and watching and following Matthew Stafford, rooting for him to go to a Super Bowl.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all I have to say about the Four Falls of Buffalo. You said there was a basketball one you watched. I didn't see it, so.
Yeah, I heard about that one. It was a great one. You know,
You didn't you didn't end up watching it.
Did not watch that one, Joe.
All right, so I didn't watch it either. If you see a basketball 30 for 30, check it out. Tweet at us. Let us know your thoughts. And the final one is Deion's double play. Anyone who doesn't know, Deion Primetime Sanders was one of the few athletes to play in both Major League Baseball and the NFL. Him and Bo Jackson are really the only prominent two. There may have been other ones who weren't quite as successful. But yeah, Deion Sanders, for anyone that doesn't know, only person to score a home run in the World Series and a touchdown in the Super Bowl. He also, I believe, at one point scored a home run and a touchdown during the same calendar week.
Jeez.
So yeah, super phenomenal athlete. And at one point in his career, he was playing for basically this is the story of the 30 for 30. At one point in his career, he was playing for the Atlanta Falcons and the Atlanta Braves. And the Falcons had a home game, and the Braves had an away playoff game in New York. And I think they were playing at 8 o'clock one night, they were playing 8 o'clock on Saturday night. And then the Falcons had a game at home Sunday at 1. And then the Braves had another away playoff game that Sunday at 8 o'clock. And so he decided, I'm going to play in all three games. And I guess he had in his contract that after July 31st, when football season really kicked into gear as far as practices and stuff go, he would stop playing for the Braves and start playing for the Falcons. However, the Braves general manager, I guess, didn't see that in his contract, or he said that Deion Sanders had verbally agreed to finish out the season with the Braves. And there was kind of a big fight and contention, and the Braves weren't happy that he was playing with the Falcons while the Braves were in the playoffs, and ultimately it kind of followed his story, and he played for the Braves a Saturday night, didn't have a great game, played for the Falcons on Sunday, didn't have a great the coach of the Falcons basically said, Deion Sanders wasn't at 100%, but he was still the best player on the field, and he ended up scoring a touchdown, I think. And then went to play for the Braves that Sunday night, but they were so mad at him, and he was like almost late to the game, that they benched him and didn't let him see the field at all. And so it kind of ruined his whole thing of he wanted to play 2 games for 2 different sports on the same day. But it was a fun documentary, interesting documentary, great look at Deion Sanders' life, who was one of the more entertaining figures in sports, and now he is the head coach of Jackson State, which is HBCU. He's kind of changed the game a little bit as far as coaching, because he's gotten of the 2022 high school class, he's gotten the basically top recruit in all of football to sign with his college. And to put it in movies perspective for Tristan to understand, it would basically be like if you were thinking box office, The Rock, or if you were thinking like acting ability, like Daniel Day-Lewis to sign on to like a student film.
Wow.
And so he's crushing it as a college coach right now. And I think it was just an entertaining documentary look at Deion Sanders as a personality in his life.
Yeah, I'd be curious to check that one out. It sounds like it's very much about the person, and I love that premise of he's playing in both of these major sports, and he's trying somehow to make it work, it feels like it would be a fun one to watch. And if I was gonna watch a sport, it'd probably be baseball. Baseball is the one that I've
Yeah.
seen by miles the most games of. So
Yep.
it could be something that I get something out of more so than the football ones. Or I've seen like 2 football games in my life or
Yeah.
something. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. So, oh, so that kind of wraps up our discussion on 30 for 30s. We do have some other news. Looks like Doogie Kame Aloha MD is getting season 2. Tristan and I are happy about that. There's some rumor speculation that Obi-Wan may be coming in May because someone who works at Disney higher up tweeted out that Obi-Wan is coming to Disney Plus May 2022. However, they quickly deleted it, and there's a thing posted by Star Wars that there is an Obi-Wan comic coming May 2022. So people are curious if maybe that person that works at Disney just misunderstood what they saw, or if they just haven't officially released it yet and they're releasing a comic kind of alongside the show. So, not 100% sure on that.
Curious, yeah. I'm looking forward to seeing how that plays out. And I heard also that Armor Wars, the Disney Plus Marvel show, is going to be starting filming at the end of the year fall this year. So we're going to be getting that. I would imagine like middle of next year, probably. So that'll be a good one. We're starting to get a picture of these shows' release schedules now because we do have that big gap coming up where we're not quite sure what they're going to be doing. So we're going to be filling in some movies for ourselves there. So yeah, it's interesting to get a timeline on some of these shows. I'm looking forward to seeing how it plays out. And yeah, we talked about football and Disney this episode, so I do want to mention too the Super Bowl is coming up,
Yeah,
and I imagine we're gonna get a couple Disney Plus trailers and teasers. If you have any predictions, what you think we might see, I would place my bets on a few of the shows. I think we're gonna see an Obi-Wan reveal. I imagine we see Gregor in the costume and kind of a teaser for that. I think that would be good. I imagine Doctor Strange too, but that's not going to be a Disney Plus show. That's a movie. So
I know 2 that are confirmed that like they've already seen where the ad space has been bought.
what do we got?
Moon Knight and Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness are the 2 I saw that are basically locked in and confirmed because the ad space has already been bought for those.
That makes sense to me. Those are the most, they like to market the things one at a time. We talked about that, and
but they do
I think it makes sense.
Yeah, they do market Star Wars and Marvel independently, and so I would not be 100% shocked because at that point, Boba Fett will be over, and I would not at all be surprised if we get some kind of Kenobi thing. Even if it, like, I think, honestly, like, they don't need a full 30-second ad. I think a 5-second ad of Obi-Wan outside of his little hut, Ewan McGregor in the costume, and it just says Kenobi coming May 4th, 2022, or whatever the release date is. I'm also of the mind of, like, I've been seeing stuff that there may be a chance that we don't have a Star Wars release on May 4th. Kenobi might not come till June. However, we may get the trailer for Kenobi on May 4th.
That'd be a long wait, Joe. I mean,
Yeah.
we're about to finish Boba Fett in 1 week. That's a big gap for Star Wars to fill.
Yeah, I think at that point we would have to expect that Bad Batch is just going to overlap stuff.
Yeah, I can't wait to see how this plays out, the schedule-wise. Somehow that's the most exciting part of the news this week is just like what's going to come out when, now that Disney is trying to figure out the schedule post-pandemic, and who knows? Yeah. We'll be here for this show every week regardless.
Yeah, if there's anything you want us to talk about, tweet at us at Movie Changeup, and we will try to cover it on Disney Plus. We're trying to figure out how exactly we want to do things because we're talking about covering, some of the older stuff and not just necessarily new drops, but stuff like these 30 for 30s and other things that, are maybe new to Disney Plus or have been on Disney Plus and not just, new things. Like we talked about National Treasure last week because of our Nicolas Cage podcast. So if there's anything, even it doesn't necessarily have to be a new release that you want us to talk about, and we're trying to figure out different ways or different interesting ways we can bring up conversation. Like we've talked about having a wheel that we spin at the end of every episode, and we know, okay, like this is what we're talking about next week, or I don't know, we'll figure it out. If you have any ideas, tweet at us at Movie Changeup. Tristan, any final thoughts? Anything you want to say?
No, I hope we see Boba Fett next week.
All right. I agree. I hope we see Ahsoka kill Boba Fett and they just say Ahsoka coming December 2023. Without further ado, goodbye.